Hey everyone, Warwick's here. So Blizzard announced some new class changes that have been coming out that'll be going in, I'm assuming with, yeah, it says here with weekly maintenance, so on Tuesday. So we're just going to briefly touch on all of it real quick. So let's dive right in. Let's start with Death Knight, Blood Death Knight. A lot of these are going to be focused on hero talent trees that are underperforming. So Sand Lane for Death Knight, Blood DK was vastly inferior to Deathbringer, so they're trying to make Sand Lane a little bit better by buffing it across the board. How that affects Blood Death Knight, we'll find out. I imagine Sand Lane probably becomes a little bit more playable, but in what situations, I'm not sure. Demon Hunter. Now, I've been playing a little bit of Demon Hunter. Havoc only this expansion. Aldrachi Reaver, very far behind against Felskard in terms of play and performance. So they made Wounded Quarry, Warglave's Hunger, and Reaver's Glaive all do more damage. Now, Aldrachi Reaver has a little bit more of an involved playstyle versus Felskard, so it's interesting to see how this is going to impact things. I don't know if because of the additional buttons, I mean, you add like 3 or 4 buttons playing Aldrachi Reaver, is that going to actually be really good? It has some really good single target prio damage right now, but it's not great in AoE, so could it see play in raids now? We'll have to take a look and see. Vengeance got a mastery buff, so that's good for them. They've had a situation where they're just kind of falling over on pole a lot of times, where particularly if you jump in, it doesn't look good, but you know, a lot of that's just Vengeance needs to just learn to pull with Throw Glaive, not with Infernal Leap. Shattered Soul's healing per soul reduced to 7% of increase, so they gave it a little bit of sustain buff, and they gave Soul Barrier a little bit of a buff too, so Vengeance getting a little bit of a tankiness buff. Feral Druid and Wildstalker gave the chance for Bloodseeker Vines to do more in AoE, and the bursting growth damage is increased by 10%. Druid of the Claw, very dominant for Feral Druid right now, so is this going to be enough to make Wildstalker good enough? I don't know. I think Druid of the Claw still is going to see more overall gameplay. Restoration just getting a 5% aura buff outside of PvP and a 40% healing increase to Cenarian Ward. Resto Druids have been struggling all expansion with healing throughput, so this is a nice little buff to them. So congratulations there. Evoker, which if you haven't been paying attention to my streams, I'm actually now maining as of right now. So played mostly Devastation with Preservation Flex, but Augmentation just took another nerf, Blistering Scales, which used to give 30% of your armor, now only gives 20, so that's going to hurt Augmentation a little bit. Where Augmentation, I would say it actually isn't like all that good from the perspective of like the damage and support output that it's doing, but its defensive components are still so incredibly strong that you're seeing a ton of them still in high keys. Maybe this is a little bit of a nerf there, Blistering Scales there. Ideally, this means that they have to pay attention to tanks a little bit more, because a lot of them don't feel the same durability that I think they intended to get. Alright. We are looking at Devastation. Flame Shaper Consume Flame got a damage increase, and Engulf damage was reduced by 20% in PvP combat. Now, Devastation's Flame Shaper talent tree is one that's not seeing a lot of play right now for Devastation Evokers. But basically, Engulf here just got a little bit of a damage buff, or a little bit of a reduction for PvP, because it's very powerful there. But Consume Flame, which is here, basically just makes it so that when you engulf target with Fire Breath, it detonates, it deals all damage to nearby allies. And they just made it do a little bit more damage. It still makes it so that Flame Shaper has a slightly more like complicated rotation, but it potentially puts it into the play. Now, I'm a big fan of Scale Commander. I think Scale Commander is excellent in Mythic Plus, and I will probably stick with it there. But at least in AoE or in single target situations, there's a possibility that Flame Shaper could start to see play. I'll let the math nerds get on it and go from there. Preservation, Flame Shaper, Engulf Healing increased by 20%, but Consume Flame reduced by 50%. Now, for Preservation, let me swap over to them. Again, Engulf basically was just an activator for everything else, but for raid situations, again, I'm playing Chrono Warden for Mythic Plus, but Consume Flame here basically, when you would Dream Breath on a target, you would detonate it and then heal a bunch of allies. It was massive, massive burst healing, and made it so that you could like Dream Breath over your group, turn around, hit Engulf on them, and you would just do massive, massive AoE healing that really was kind of unmatched by any other healer. So Flame Shaper is going to take a bit of a nerf. I actually was playing Chrono Warden in raid, so I'm going to be trying this out. Even with the nerf, I still think it has some real high value in a raid situation, so we will see. BM Hunter, now I've been playing more PvP related stuff with Hunter, trying to learn that aspect because I've enjoyed Hunter and PvP. Basilisk collar damage bonus reduced 2 to 4%, so they took a pretty hefty single target nerf on that. But kill command damage got increased by 18% and pet damage got increased by 4%. So a more generic buff with one specific talent that was really overperforming in single target, getting a little bit of a nerf. I think that's pretty fair balance. And then they buffed the tier set for Survival Hunters. Wildfire Bomb got a damage increase, and then the Raptor Strike Mongoose Bite getting affected by targets with Wildfire Bomb increased from 20% to 10%, so good stuff there. Mages, Frostfire basically just got a bonus across the board. They're trying to buff it. It's falling behind like Spellslinger and the other one pretty significantly across all the boards, so they're just trying to make Frostfire a little bit better. Monk. Let's talk about Monk now. Obviously the class that I know the deepest on. Master of Harmony. Stored Vitality causes an additional 40% healing damage versus 25% damage. Now, this is just like a generic buff to Master of Harmony because neither spec, Mistweaver nor Brewmaster were really using it at all in any situations because it was just very weak. Alright. Let's actually swap over to my Monk real quick so we can look at this. Alright, so Master of Harmony, basically you would store 15% of your damage dealt, and then after you cast Celestial Brew, it pulses out the damage. Coalescence basically makes it so that when your aspect deals damage, it can spread out to the target. And the targets that have this take an additional 10% increased damage or healing from you. That is going to be now getting buffed to 20% versus 10%. Chi Wave and Chi Burst dealing 100% increased damage versus 50% increased damage. Overwhelming Force was increased to 20% instead of being 15%. So Overwhelming Force, I believe... yeah, it's here. Basically makes it so that your normal spenders do slightly more damage to enemies in a line in front of you. So it was good AoE damage. And then Balanced Stratagem increases damage from 5 up to 5% from 3%. So Fire and Nature spells, which basically is Chi Burst and Breath of Fire. For Mistweaver, it now increases the healing and taken by 30% versus 20%, and now stores 30% of healing instead of 20. So for Mistweaver, I don't think this changes anything. I think you're going to still play Conduit of the Celestials 99% of the time. For Brewmaster, there is a possibility that this starts to push you into Master of Harmony for like really high keys, but I still think you just run Shadow Pan because I think it's just better still. But we'll see how things play out. We'll definitely have to do some testing on Tuesday when these release. Conduit of the Celestials now scales with its damage with mastery hit combo. That's got to be a typo because their mastery is called combo strikes. So we'll give it a couple days and see what Blizzard wants to do on that. But if that's the case, then that makes Conduit of the Celestials better. Is it good enough to overtake Shadowpan in situations? I don't know. I want to play Conduit of the Celestials in Mythic Plus. I think it's a really fun ability that allows to have a little bit of supportiness to it because it does a lot of healing and good damage still. And I think there's value in that in Mythic Plus. I don't see it ever taking place in Raid. I don't see it as that. Alright. Holy Paladin got a 5% aura reduction, but doesn't affect PvP combat, which, based on the AWC that I watched today, is probably a good thing. Paladin seemed to struggle a little bit. Lightsmith got some buffs, with Awakening now causing Blessing the Forge to spawn a Sacred Weapon when extending the duration of Avenging Wrath. They got a 20-yard healing radius on those, and 150% increase in healing, and then Divine Guidance got increased by 50%. So Lightsmith obviously fell way behind Templar, so, or whatever the other one is, so definitely want to be able to see that. Prot Paladin got a 6% damage increase, a 20% healing increase on WoG. Light of the Titans now heals over 10 seconds instead of 15 seconds. That's actually probably a good change. Faith in the Light duration was increased to 6 seconds versus 5. That's a good change. And then Lightsmith got a number of buffs on that as well. So Prot Paladin seeing their stocks rising. We're seeing that right now the tank meta is dominated by Vengeance Demon Hunter is actually playing really well at the top end, but as is Warrior. Guardian Druid is seeing some really nice play at the top end. Prot Paladin was definitely the tank that's struggling the most. Blood DK was obviously seeing some high play. Brewmaster and Prot Paladin are kind of in a different tier where that they were really struggling with, particularly in keys this season. So we're going to see what happens now with these bonuses to Prot Paladin and go from there. Retribution, Shake the Heavens lasts for 10 seconds versus 8. So Templar basically just getting a ton of buffs here as well, trying to bring that up, make it viable with their other talent trait. Shadow Priest basically got some flat damage increase to single target. Mind Blast, Shadow Word Death, and Void Bolt, as long as Shadowy Apparitions all got a damage buff. So heaven forbid Shadow Priest not be meta in Mythic Plus again. Here we are. And then Void Weaver got some buffs. Maybe that brings it in. I know that my older brother has really wanted to play Void Weaver, but Archon is just better with the Halo build, so we'll see what happens there. Excuse me. Assassination, which has seen a spec that has really good funnel, but it's not really shined anywhere else. Caustic Spatter got a slight nerf from 45 to 40%, but the set bonus got buffed with Vile Tincture, chance proc to proc increased, and then it affects more spells correctly, so apparently it was bugged. And then the 4 set now applies at 5 stacks versus 6, and definitely, as you say in the developer's note there, it says it's weighted towards single target, not necessarily AoE. And then Outlaw kind of got a just straight up aura buff. All ability damage by 4%, dispatch damage by 6%, good stuff there. And then Precise Guts bonus to Flay Flurry damage per missing target was increased to 4% from 2%. Good changes there. I'm not the biggest fan of Outlaw. I really like Assassination when I play Rogue, but Outlaw's like fine. It's a nice little like way to switch up damage. I haven't leveled my Rogue yet, but we'll see. Restoration Shaman. Earth and Harmony now calls Earth Shield to reduce damage taken by 3% instead of 5%, and then Acid Rain damage reduced by 20%. So this is probably a good thing. Restoration Shaman dominates the Mythic Plus healing meta right now, when a lot of people expected it to be Disc Priest or Preservation Evoker. So maybe this will help bring those specs back into the mix. Mistweaver can see some play. Holy Priest still needs some help, I think. And then Resto Druid, of course, getting a flat buff, so we'll see what happens. But, yeah, it's probably some good targeted nerfs to Resto Shaman. I still think their stamina buff that they can give the raid needs to be looked at a little bit, because it does a shitload of Mythic Plus, but we'll see. Demonology Warlock. Pact of the Aerodune Doomguards deal 20% increased damage. Nice. Grimoire Felguard got a buff now, increasing the damage of the Summon Felguard to 60% versus 45%. It's good. And then Felguard, the pet damage got increased, and then the Gloomhound's Gloom Slash increased by 20%. So not direct spells for Demonology Warlock, but their pets get a little bit of damage. Considering 60% of their damage comes from pets, that's probably not a bad thing. So some targeted tweaks here to Demonology just to kind of bring them up just slightly. Alright, Warrior, they got some hero talent tweaks across the board here. So Colossus, Arterial Bleed causes Colossal Might to increase damage dealt by deep wounds and Ren by 3% versus 2%. And No Stranger to Pain increases total damage ignored by Ignore Pain by 20% versus 15%. I've experimented a little bit with Colossus in AoE as an arms warrior, and not at all really. It's potentially a raid spec for Prot Warrior, but the little bit that I played with Colossus, it just kind of feels clunky to use Demolish at any point. Like, it just kind of breaks the flow in ways that don't feel great. So I think that's the big thing that needs to be looked at for Colossus, is how you can more smoothly integrate Demolish into the rotations for both specs. And if that gets changed, then I think it can become a really fun playstyle. Mountain Thane, Lightning Strike damage increased by 25%, Ground Current damage increased by 25%, and Thorn's Might causes Lightning Strikes to generate 3 Rage versus 5 Rage. Now, Mountain Thane is a very dominant for Prot Warrior. They just got a damage buff. You do that a lot. Fury Warrior, I don't know if this is going to change anything. Obviously, we see they get some targeted changes here, but we'll see what that looks like. But I don't know if Fury's going to want to try to integrate Thunderclap into the rotation. I've always been of the opinion that Mountain Thane should have been Arms Warrior and Prot Warrior, so I think they just got the order on this wrong, but we'll see. Slayer, Culling Cyclone bonuses Blade Storm damage reduced to 10%. That's probably good. Opportunist now increases damage and critical strike damage of your next overpower by 20%. So Slayer got a nerf, which means DPS Warriors took another nerf, a spec that was already starting to see some issues. Started to find themselves coming forward now with more nerfs to probably by far their best talent tree. Fury got a buff to its 2-piece and its 4-piece bonuses, making it stack a little bit more, so trying to offset some of the Slayer nerfs with buffs to their tier set. Mountain Thane gives more rage generation, and Strength of the Mountain increases the damage by another 10%, and Execute damage is increased another 10%. I don't know if this is going to make Mountain Thane playable for Fury. Again, I struggle to see it. I want to try it out. I'll see. But I just don't know if it's going to be functional or not. And then for Prot Warrior, Mountain Thane generates 8 rage versus 10. It's probably good considering the buff that they're going to get damage-wise to it. I think that's probably a net like equal thing. PvP changes. Although I'm playing Hunter, I am not going to sit there and say any of these changes without any sort of definitive notion. So overall, I think most of these classes are getting some decent tuning here. We'll definitely have to kind of monitor the work of your theory crafters in your class discords and stuff like that. But on the whole, I think they probably did a decent job targeting underperforming hero talent trees, nerfed a couple of overperformers in Flame Shaper for preservation, and Slayer for Warrior. And we'll see how this all shakes out. So definitely keep an eye on your class discords if you have any questions. If you have any comments here, Monk, if you know of anything, how it's going to impact your class, leave a comment below. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.